It was a humid, moonless night on the island of Oahu. Jackson, a native of the island but a city dweller for most of his life, had always heard stories about strange happenings in the more remote parts of the island. He wasn't one to believe in old superstitions, but when his cousin asked him to join a group hiking into the deep, forested valleys of Kaua'a to camp, he couldn't resist. They'd hiked for hours, climbing over moss-covered rocks and through towering trees until they found a clearing near the edge of a cliff that overlooked the ocean. The wind was light, and the only sounds were the rustling of the trees and a rhythmic crashing of the waves far below. That night, the group sat around a fire, telling ghost stories, laughing, and teasing each other. Jackson had stepped away to relieve himself when he saw it, a distant glow, low to the ground, coming from the thick forest line across the valley. At first, he thought it was a trick of the firelight, maybe other campers, but then he saw them, small dots of light moving in a line like torches. The lights grew brighter, closer, and he could hear the unmistakable sound of chanting, a low, rhythmic beat like the deep hum of a drum. He stood frozen, watching as the procession approached, their figures becoming clearer. Jackson saw shadowy shapes, dozens of them, marching in perfect synchronization. As they came closer, he could make out their forms. Tall, strong warriors, some adorned with ancient helmets and capes, others carrying spears. Their eyes were glowing white, emotionless, and their faces were stern, filled with a deep, silent purpose. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with their steps. He tried to call out to the group, but his voice caught in his throat. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized something. These figures weren't of this world. Jackson dropped to the ground, face pressed into the dirt as the chilling sound of the marchers moved past him. The wind howled for a brief moment. The world felt like it stopped spinning. When he dared look up, they were gone. The air around him was still, but the terror lingered. The topic of tonight's episode is the Night Marchers. And again, still down with this illness, still going on. Might make it even harder for me to pronounce some of these, so if I'm pronouncing them wrong, I am sorry. But let's get into it. The Night Marchers, or the Hawaiian, as they are called in the Hawaiian tongue, which, I don't have a tongue that's from Hawaii, so, are the spectral remnants of ancient Hawaiian warriors. They appear as ghostly figures clad in traditional Hawaiian battle attire, some wearing helmets made of woven leaves or wood, others draped in long cloaks of sacred kapa fabric. Their faces are often stern and expressionless, their eyes glowing like pale, distant stars. The marchers always appear in single file lines, and in their hands they carry ancient weapons, spears, clubs, and torches that burn with a cold, unnatural light. They are silent except for the rhythmic sound of their feet, moving in perfect unison. Sometimes you can hear the distant sound of chanting, deep and ancient, like a whisper from a forgotten past. Accompanying them are haunting beats of pahu drums filling the air with a sense of dread. Though they are transparent, shimmering like heat waves rising off the ground, their presence feels solid, oppressive, as if the weight of the centuries of battles and duty marches with them. The Night Marchers are believed to be spirits of ancient Hawaiian warriors, forever bound to protect the sacred paths they once walked. These spirits, often tasked with escorting high-ranking chiefs or kings, would clear the way, making the land kapu, or forbidden to all who crossed in it. In ancient times, anyone who found themselves on a night marcher path while they were present would face immediate death unless they showed the utmost respect, dropping to the ground in submission. Hawaiian lore speaks of these warriors as fiercely loyal, bound to duty even in death. They are said to appear on certain nights, usually during the phases of the new moon or at twilight, marching to a sacred site such as temples. That's what they are, temples, burial grounds, or battlefields. Some believe the marchers are escorting the spirits of the newly deceased to the afterlife, while others say they are reenacting battles or ceremonies from long ago. They are tied to the land and the deep traditions of the islands, remnants of an era where life and death were governed by the will of the gods and the power of the chiefs. The pathways they march on are believed to be sacred, and locals know to avoid them. These paths often follow ancient trails that lead through valleys, along coastlines, and through dense forests. If you happen to cross one of these pathways on a night when the marchers appear, your only hope of survival is to lay face down in the dirt and show absolute respect, never meeting their gaze. It is said that those with ties to the old families, descendants of the warriors, might be spared, recognized by the spirits of their own. Jackson's encounter may have been terrifying, but it's not the only one. These spirits have been seen across the islands by countless witnesses, and their stories share eerie similarities. The night marchers always seem to arrive unannounced, appearing out of nowhere, leaving those who witness them with a chilling reminder that not everything from the past stays buried. Take the story of Lilana, a young woman from the island of Kauai. She was attending a beachside luau with friends near Polahau State Park, a location known for its legends about the night marchers. The night was alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and the crashing waves. Lilana and her friends had stayed later than they should have, lingering around a fire long after the other guests had left. As the embers began to die down, a heavy silence fell over the group. The once playful ocean now sounded distant, muffled, as if the world around them had shifted. She noticed it at first, a faint glow along the ridge of the nearby cliffs. At first, she thought it was just the moonlight reflecting off the rocks, but the lights were moving, slowly descending toward the beach in a perfectly straight line. The others in the group saw it too, and one of her friends jokingly whispered about the night marchers. But the joke died on his lips as the sound of drums, slow and deliberate, began to drift down from the cliffs. Panic gripped the group. Her heart raced as soon as she stood, staring at a spectral procession making its way towards the shore. The figures that appeared from the darkness were unmistakable. Warriors, tall and proud, carrying torches that burned with a cold, eerie light. Lilana was paralyzed with fear as they moved closer. Their faces were expressionless, eyes glowing like embers, and they chanted a language she couldn't understand, but could feel deep in her bones. She, like Jackson, dropped to the sand, face down, trembling. She could feel the earth shake beneath her as they passed by, their footsteps heavy with the weight of the centuries. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice her. When the air finally cleared, she dared to lift her head. They were gone, leaving only the distant sound of drums echoing in her ears. She and her friends left the beach that night, never speaking of what they had seen, but knowing in their hearts they had encountered something ancient and powerful. Another harrowing experience comes from a man named Kimo, a park ranger on the Big Island. Kimo was assigned to patrol the area around Waipio Valley, a place steeped in history and sacred significance. It was his job to monitor the trails and ensure that tourists didn't wander too far into the valley, especially after dark. One evening, after most of the hikers had cleared out, Kimo noticed an unusual silence. The birds had stopped singing, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the depths of the valley came the sound of distant chanting. He had heard the stories, of course. He'd grown up hearing the tales of the night marchers from his grandmother, who had always warned him to never wander alone at night, but he had never truly believed them. That night, though, something in the air changed. The sound grew louder, and Kimo felt a sudden pressure, as if the very atmosphere had thickened. His radio clacked with static, and then it died completely. His flashlight flickered before going out. Panic seized him as he turned, looking toward the source of the chanting. The valley floor seemed to glow as torchlight flickered through the trees. He saw them then, dozens of them, marching in a straight line, their footsteps synchronized, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of the torches. Kimo's breath caught in his throat. These weren't human beings. They were something else, something out of time. His legs locked as he watched the ghostly procession draw closer. He remembered his grandmother's warning and dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground. He could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears, competing with the steady rhythm of the marchers' drums. The air grew colder as they passed, and Kimo swore he felt the brush of cold hands against his back. The chanting rose to a fever pitch surrounding him, filling his head with an overwhelming sense of dread. When the chanting stopped, he dared look up. The valley was empty. The night marchers had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving no trace except the faint scent of burning wood. Kimo fled the valley that night and resigned from his job soon after. He swore he would never return to that sacred place. There's also a account of Mila, a hiker who had been exploring the lush, winding trails of the Napali coast on Kauai. She had been hiking for hours, enjoying the breathtaking views of the rugged cliffs and the turquoise waters below. But as the sun set, she began to realize she had stayed out too late. The light was fading fast, and she was still miles from her campsite. The trail, once familiar, seemed to close in around her as shadows stretched across the land. The air grew still, unnaturally quiet, as if the world had paused to listen. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of conch shells being blown in the distance, followed by the deep, resonant thumping of pahu drums. The noise came from ahead of her, and as she rounded the bend, her heart dropped. There, Blocking the trail was a line of warriors. Their bodies glowed faintly in the twilight, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Some carried spears while others bore ancient Hawaiian standards, fluttering in an invisible wind. She froze in terror, her mind racing. She knew what they were. She had heard the legends growing up, but she never thought she'd witness it for herself. Her instincts kicked in and she dropped to the ground trembling. She could feel the earth shaking beneath her as the marchers approached. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying they wouldn't notice her. The sounds of her footsteps, like chanting, and the conch shells grew louder, enveloping her in suffocating embrace of ancient power. It felt like hours passed, though it was only minutes. When the noise finally ceased and the air returned to its normal weight, she opened her eyes to find herself alone on the trail. The marchers had gone, as if they had never existed. As she returned to her campsite, she found herself haunted by the memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been too close to something far beyond her comprehension. Even now, she refused to hike that trail after dark, knowing that the night marchers still walk it, guarding the sacred paths of old. The night marchers are far more than a relic of Hawaiian myth. They are a living, breathing part of the island's spiritual fabric. The relentless march through the night serves as a haunting reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that the ancient warriors of Hawaii continue to protect the land they once walked. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the stories of the night marchers are enough to make anyone think twice before wandering the island's sacred trails after dark. So the next time you hear the distant beat of drums, or see a procession of ghostly lights in the night, remember these stories. Lie down, show respect, and hope they pass you by, because some paths are not meant to be crossed by the living. Thank you for joining me on tonight's exploration of the unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. There's always more lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Good night, and be sure to stay out of the marcher's path.